My name is Major Yuri Vaganov. I served the Soviet Union for 30 years. I have seen the horrors of Chernobyl. I have cleaned up biological leaks in Sverdlovsk. I thought I knew what hell looked like. I was wrong. Hell is not a place you go to when you die. Hell is a place we built. If you are listening to this tape, then the Soviet Union has likely fallen. The empire is gone, but the whole remains. They will tell you in the history books that the Kola Superdeep Borehole project was stopped because of lack of funds. They will tell you that we stopped drilling at 12,262 meters because the temperatures were too high for the equipment. That is the official lie. That is what they want you to believe. We didn't stop because of the heat. We stopped because of the noise. It started on the night of September 12, 1989. The drill bit dropped into a cavity, a void. We thought we had hit a pocket of natural gas or a new geological layer. The scientists were celebrating. They lowered a heat-resistant microphone down the shaft to listen to the movement of the tectonic plates. They expected to hear the sound of the earth shifting, maybe the sound of wind. Instead, they heard a voice. It wasn't just one voice, it was thousands, screaming, crying out in a language that predates humanity. The station went silent 12 hours later. No distress signal, no evacuation order, just silence. I was sent in with a team of 4 men to assess the situation. Our orders were simple. Go in, secure the data, restart the communications. We never restarted the communications because there was no one left to talk to. What we found in that frozen wasteland, inside that metal tower, defies every law of physics and biology. We drilled too deep. We knocked on a door that should have remained shut forever, and something answered. This is not a story about ghosts. This is not a story about demons. This is a warning. The Earth is not a dead rock floating in space. It is a cage, and we just broke the lock. This is the account of what really happened at Site SG-3. My name is Yuri Vaganov, and I am the man who had to close the door. The helicopter ride to the Kola Peninsula was brutal. The Mi-8 transport shook violently against the Arctic winds. Outside the porthole, there was nothing but endless, blinding white. The tundra, a place where life goes to freeze. I looked at my team. They were good men, hard men. Sergeant Volkov, a giant of a man who had survived Afghanistan. Dr. Arisov, a physicist who looked more comfortable in a library than a war zone. And 2 Spetsnaz operatives, dim and silent, whose names I never bothered to learn. We were the cleanup crew, the heavy hand of the Kremlin. The pilot's voice crackled in my headset. He said we were approaching the target, Site SG-3, the pride of Soviet science, the deepest hole ever dug by mankind. As the facility came into view through the swirling snow, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. It didn't look like a triumph of science. It looked like a tombstone. The massive drilling tower stood like a rusted needle against the gray sky, piercing the clouds. The surrounding buildings were dark. No smoke from the chimneys, no lights in the windows, just a monolith of concrete and steel, buried in the snow. We landed in the courtyard. The rotors kicked up a storm of ice crystals. I stepped out first, my boots crunching on the frozen ground. The cold hit me instantly. It was minus 30 degrees, but it felt colder. It felt unnatural. The air smelled sharp, metallic, like ozone and old blood. We moved towards the main entrance. The heavy steel doors were unlocked. They were slightly ajar, swinging gently in the wind with a rhythmic, groaning creak. I signaled for silence. We entered the main hangar. The transition was jarring. Outside, the wind howled like a wolf. Inside, the silence was absolute. It was heavy, pressing against our eardrums. The hangar was vast, filled with crates of equipment, drilling pipes, and machinery. Emergency lights bathed the room in a dim, pulsing red glow. The main generator must have failed, leaving the facility on backup power. There was no one at the security checkpoint. A half-eaten sandwich sat on a desk, the bread dry and curled. A cup of tea had frozen solid, the spoon stuck in the brown ice at an angle. They hadn't evacuated. They had been interrupted. We moved deeper, towards the living quarters. The air grew warmer here, stiflingly warm. It smelled of sulfur, rotten eggs, and wet dog. Dr. Arisov pulled out his Geiger counter. The clicking sound was erratic, but low. Radiation levels were normal, but Arisov looked disturbed. He tapped the glass of the device. He said the background radiation was too low. It was as if the facility was absorbing it. We reached the cafeteria. Tables were overturned. Chairs were smashed against the walls. A struggle. But there were no bodies, no blood, just chaos. Then Sergeant Volkov called out from the back of the room. He was standing near the kitchen entrance. He was pointing his flashlight at the wall. I walked over. The beam of my light cut through the gloom. Written on the wall, in what looked like black grease or oil, was a message. It was written frantically, the letters jagged and uneven. It said, "Do not listen." I touched the substance. It was sticky, warm. It wasn't grease. It was some kind of organic slime. We continued to the communications room. This was our primary objective. Find out why the station went silent. The door was locked from the inside. Volkov kicked it open with a single, powerful blow. The room was a wreck. Radio equipment was smashed. Consoles were torn apart, wires hanging out like gutted intestines. In the center of the room sat the communications officer, or at least his uniform. The clothes were there, the shirt, the pants, the boots. They were sitting in the chair, arranged perfectly, as if a man was wearing them. But the man was gone. There was no body inside the clothes. It was as if he had simply evaporated, or melted. On the desk, in front of the empty uniform, the reel-to-reel tape recorder was still spinning. The tape had run out hours ago, the end of the reel slapping against the machine with a rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack. I reached out and stopped the machine. The silence rushed back in, louder than before. Dr. Arisov found the station logbook on the floor. He picked it up, his hands trembling in his thick gloves. He flipped to the last entry. It was dated yesterday. 800 hours. He read it aloud. His voice was barely a whisper in the red dark. He read, "We have broken through. The drill has dropped freely. Depth 12,262 meters. Temperature is 180 degrees Celsius. We lowered the microphone. We made a mistake. God help us. We made a mistake." Suddenly, the lights in the corridor outside flickered and died. We were plunged into total darkness, and then, from deep beneath our feet, from the bowels of the facility, we heard it. It started as a vibration in the soles of my boots, a low, grinding hum. The drilling tower. It was turning on. Someone, or something, had restarted the drill. I racked the slide of my AK-47. The sound echoed violently in the small room. "We are not alone," I said to the dark. We moved out into the corridor, our flashlight beams cutting through the blackness. The vibration was getting stronger. The heat was rising. We had to go down. We had to go to the control room at the base of the shaft. We had to see what was at the bottom of the hole. I didn't know it then, but we were walking into the mouth of the beast. The white silence of the tundra was behind us. Ahead of us, there was only the red noise of the deep. We left the communications room and headed towards the residential block. The layout of Site SG-3 was a labyrinth. Corridors of gray concrete, exposed pipes, and flickering fluorescent tubes that buzzed like dying insects. The vibration from the drill was constant now. It wasn't just a mechanical shaking. It felt rhythmic, like a pulse. Thump, 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 thump. The facility felt like it was breathing. We needed to find the project lead, Dr. Semenov. He would have the keys to the elevator shaft that led down to the main drilling platform. His quarters were on level 2. As we descended the stairwell, the temperature spiked. It went from freezing cold to a humid tropical heat in the span of 2 flights of stairs. I unzipped my parka. Sweat began to trickle down my back. This shouldn't be happening. The heating systems were offline. This heat was coming from the structure itself. We entered the hallway of level 2. The air here was thick. It tasted like copper. All the doors to the scientists' rooms were open. Every single one. It looked like a prison break. I signaled the Spetsnaz operatives to check the rooms on the left. Volkov and I took the right. The first room was empty. The bed was unmade. Personal items were scattered on the floor. A picture of a wife and child. A book on geology. Normal. Too normal. The second room was different. As soon as I stepped across the threshold, the smell hit me. It was sweet. Sickeningly sweet. Like rotting fruit mixed with burnt hair. There was something on the bed. It looked like a cocoon. The bedsheets had been stripped and wrapped tightly around something. The bundle was about the size of a man. It was wet. A clear, viscous fluid was dripping from the bottom of the mattress, pooling on the linoleum floor. "Arisov, stay back," I ordered. I approached the bed, my weapon raised. With the barrel of my rifle, I slowly lifted the edge of the sheet. It peeled away with a wet, tearing sound. Inside, there was a man, or what used to be a man. It was one of the scientists. His skin had turned translucent. You could see the veins beneath, black and swollen. But the most terrifying thing was his face. His mouth was gone. The skin had grown over his lips, sealing them shut in a smooth, featureless layer of flesh. His eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling in blind panic. He was alive. He was breathing in shallow, desperate gasps through his nose. He tried to scream, but with his mouth sealed, it just came out as a muffled, high-pitched whine from his throat. Volkov cursed in Russian. He stepped back, bumping into the doorframe. "He is changing," Arisov whispered, leaning in close to the horrific face. "Look at the bone structure. His jaw, it is fusing." "Why?" I asked. "Why would his body do that?" "To stop him from speaking," Arisov said. "To stop him from making noise." Suddenly, the man on the bed convulsed. His back arched. The black veins under his skin pulsed violently. He wasn't trying to break free. He was trying to point. His hand, fused into a club-like shape where the fingers had melted together, raised up and pointed towards the floor, towards the vents. I looked down. The ventilation grate was screwed into the wall near the floor. Behind the metal slats, in the darkness of the air duct, something was moving, slithering. It sounded like wet leather, dragging on steel. "We are leaving," I said. "Now." I didn't mercy kill him. I wanted to. God knows I wanted to put a bullet in his brain and end his misery. But we had orders. Assess, report, contain. We couldn't waste ammunition on the victims. Not yet. We backed out of the room, leaving the faceless man to his silent screaming. We moved back into the corridor. The Spetsnaz team was waiting for us. They looked rattled. These were men who killed without blinking, but they looked pale. "We found them," one of them said. "The others?" I asked. "No, Major. We found their clothes, just like upstairs. Piles of clothes. But look at this." He held up a lab coat. It was stiff, covered in a gray, dust-like substance. I touched it. It crumbled between my fingers. It wasn't dust. It was human skin. Flakes of dried, dead skin. "They didn't leave," Arisov said, his voice trembling. "They shed, like snakes. They shed their humanity and went somewhere else." "Where?" Volkov asked. "Down," I said. "They went down." We reached the end of the corridor. The door to Dr. Semenov's room was the only one that was closed, and locked. I placed a small explosive charge on the handle. "Turn away," I ordered. Thump! The door blew inward. Smoke filled the air. We stormed in. Dr. Semenov was there. He wasn't dead. He wasn't a cocoon. He was sitting at his desk, facing the wall. He was naked. His body was covered in strange spiral carvings. He had done it to himself with a scalpel. He didn't turn around when we entered. He just kept writing, scribbling furiously on the wall with a piece of charcoal. "Dr. Semenov," I said. "I am Major Vaganov." He stopped writing. He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "You are late, Major," he said without turning. "The concert has already started." He stood up and turned to face us. His eyes were gone. He had gouged them out. The sockets were empty, black pits. "I don't need them anymore," he smiled, blood running down his cheeks like tears. "I have seen the truth. The darkness is so bright down there." He held up a keycard. "The key to the main elevator. You want to go down?" he asked, dangling the card. "You want to hear the choir?" He tossed the card at my feet. "Take it," he whispered. "Go to 12 kilometers. But remember, once you hear it, you can never unhear it." He laughed, and then he bit off his own tongue. We left Dr. Semenov in his pool of blood. One of the Spetsnaz operatives, the one named Andrei, looked at me for permission. I nodded. A single shot rang out. A mercy kill. We couldn't leave him to bleed out in the dark. I picked up the keycard from the floor. It was slick with blood. We moved to the main elevator shaft at the end of the hall. The doors were heavy blast-proof steel, painted with yellow and black hazard stripes. Above the door, a rusted dial indicated the depth. It was currently at level 2. I swiped the card. The mechanism groaned. It sounded like a dying whale. The heavy gears ground against each other, shaking the floor beneath our boots. Slowly, painfully, the doors slid open. Inside, the cage was large enough for a tank. It was an industrial freight elevator, enclosed in a wire mesh. The floor was metal grating. You could see through it. You could see the darkness waiting below. We stepped in. The heat was already intense, but as we crossed into the shaft, a blast of hot air hit us from below. It was like opening an oven door. Arisov checked the control panel. There was a single button that mattered, the one at the bottom. SG3 final depth. Press it, I said. Arisov pressed the button. The cage lurched downward. My stomach dropped. The descent began. At first, we passed the upper levels quickly. Level 3, Level 4, concrete walls flashed by. We saw flashes of abandoned equipment, flickering lights, empty hallways. But as we passed Level 6, the concrete disappeared. We were now drilling into the raw bedrock. The walls of the shaft were rough, jagged stone, scarred by the massive drill bits that had passed this way years ago. The deeper we went, the hotter it got. The thermometer on Arisov's suit was climbing. 40 degrees, 50 degrees. The air was becoming hard to breathe. It was thick and heavy. At level 9, about 7,000 meters down, the elevator slowed. It didn't stop, but it shuddered. "Look," Volkov whispered. He was pointing through the wire mesh. Outside the cage, in the rock wall, there were cavities, small natural pockets in the stone. And inside those pockets, things were moving. They looked like pale spiders, but they were too big. They were the size of dogs. They scurried across the vertical walls, ignoring gravity. "Those aren't spiders," Arisov said, his voice trembling. "Those are hands." He was right. They were clumps of human hands, fused together at the wrists, moving with a frantic, scuttling intelligence. They were climbing up the shaft, towards the surface. "Don't look at them," I ordered. "Keep your eyes on the floor." We continued down. The pressure in my ears was painful. I had to swallow constantly to pop them. The air tasted of sulfur and iron. 10,000 meters. The sound of the drill below us was deafening now, a constant grinding roar that vibrated the fillings in my teeth. Grrr, chunk, grrr, chunk. Suddenly, the Spetsnaz operative, Andrei, fell to his knees. He ripped off his helmet. He was gasping for air. "It's too loud!" he screamed. He clawed at his ears. "Get it out! Get it out of my head!" "What is it?" I yelled over the noise. "The voice!" Andrei screamed. "It's not on the radio. It's in the air. Can't you hear it?" I listened. Underneath the roar of the machinery, underneath the hum of the elevator, yes, I heard it. It sounded like a choir. Thousands of voices singing a single discordant note, a low drone that vibrated in the marrow of my bones. It wasn't menacing. It was welcoming. It was inviting us down. "Hold it together, soldier!" Volkov grabbed Andrei by the vest and hauled him up. "We are almost there. 12,000 meters. The elevator brakes screeched. Sparks showered down on us from the cables above. The cage shook violently and came to a halt. We had arrived. The doors hissed open. I expected darkness. I expected a cramped tunnel. I did not expect a cathedral. The bottom of the borehole opened up into a massive, hollowed-out chamber. The walls were lined with strange, luminescent fungi that glowed a sickly violet color. In the center of the cavern stood the main drilling rig. It was a monster of steel and hydraulics, pulsing with heat. The drill pipe extended down into a small, perfect hole in the center of the floor. But the most terrifying thing was not the machine. It was the air. The air here shimmered. It was distorted, like heat waves on a tarmac. But it wasn't just heat. It was reality bending. "Welcome to hell," Volkov muttered. We stepped out of the cage. The ground was hot enough to melt rubber. We had to keep moving. "There," I pointed. "The control booth." A small reinforced glass booth stood near the drill. That was where the recording equipment was. That was where the answers were. We ran towards it, the heat searing our lungs. We were walking on the bottom of the world, and we were about to find out who lived in the basement. The control booth was a sanctuary. We slammed the heavy door shut and sealed it. The noise of the drill was muffled instantly, replaced by the hum of cooling fans. The air conditioning here was still working on emergency power, blasting cold air that felt like a blessing. I wiped the sweat and grime from my eyes. We checked the room. It was empty of people, but it was full of madness. The walls were covered in paper, charts, seismic readings, geological surveys, but someone had drawn over them. They had connected the lines of the seismic graphs to form shapes, faces, screaming faces hidden in the data. "Check the main console," I ordered Arisov. "Find the recording from September 12th. Arisov sat at the terminal. His hands were shaking so bad he could barely type. Volkov and the Spetsnaz guarded the door, their weapons trained on the violet glow outside. "I found it, Major," Arisov said. "Audio file SG3 Alpha. Timestamp 2342. Just before the silence. Play it," I said. Arisov flipped a switch. The massive reel-to-reel tape deck in the center of the console clicked to life. The magnetic tape began to spin, hiss, crackle. At first, there was only static. Then the voice of the lead drilling engineer. "Depth 12,262. We have punched through into the cavity. Lowering microphone array. Gain set to maximum." A pause, then a sharp, high-pitched feedback whine. "What is that?" the engineer's voice asked on the tape. "Is that, wind?" "No," another voice replied. "Too rhythmic. Adjust the filter." The static cleared, and then we heard it. In the small, cold booth, 5 hardened men froze. It wasn't wind. It wasn't shifting rocks. It was a scream, but not a human scream. It sounded like 1,000,000 people screaming in unison, but their voices were wet, gurgling, as if they were drowning in thick liquid. "Help! Ooze!" It was faint at first, then it grew louder. It peaked the meters on the recording. The speakers on the console vibrated, but then, underneath the screaming, a single voice cut through, deep, guttural, speaking a language I didn't recognize, but somehow understood. It wasn't speaking Russian. It wasn't speaking English. It was speaking directly to the primal part of my brain. "Open," the voice rumbled. "The flesh is the key. Open." Andrei, the Spetsnaz operative who had panicked in the elevator, started to whimper. He dropped his rifle. He covered his ears, but he started to sway back and forth. "Turn it off," Volkov growled. "Turn it the hell off." "Wait," Arisov said. "Listen." The background noise. I leaned in closer to the speaker. Beneath the screaming, beneath the deep voice, there was a mechanical sound. Click, whir, click, whir. "It sounds like machinery," I whispered. "It sounds like a pump," Arisov said. "A giant biological heart pumping." Suddenly, on the tape, chaos broke out. "Pull it up! Pull the mic up!" the engineer screamed. "Something has grabbed the line! It's pulling us down!" The sound of metal tearing, screams in the control room, and then the recording ended with a wet, squelching sound, like a heavy boot stepping in mud. The tape reel stopped spinning. The silence in the booth was heavy. "That wasn't a geological anomaly," Arisov whispered. His face was white as a sheet. "That was a city. We drilled into a city." Suddenly, Andrei stood up. His eyes were glazed over. He wasn't looking at us. He was looking at the door. He walked towards it. "Andrei, stand down!" I barked. He didn't stop. He reached for the handle. "Open," Andrei whispered. "The flesh is the key." "No!" Volkov lunged for him, but it was too late. Andrei threw the latch and kicked the door open. The noise of the drill rushed back in, but it had changed. The drill wasn't just spinning anymore, it was pulsating. The violet light from the cavern flooded the booth. Andrei stepped out into the heat. He didn't scream. He walked straight towards the open borehole, towards the spinning pipe. He leaped. He didn't just fall. As he hit the superheated air above the hole, his body unraveled. His skin peeled back like a banana, flapping in the updraft. His muscles separated. He turned into a cloud of red mist and white bone, and was sucked down into the darkness. "He fed it," Arisov said, horrified. The voice said the flesh is the key. He just gave it the key. Suddenly, the floor beneath us buckled. A massive tremor shook the entire facility. The drill speed increased. The RPM gauge redlined. "It's coming up," Volkov yelled. "Whatever is down there, it's riding the drill up. We have to go." I grabbed the tape reel. This was the proof. We have to destroy the shaft. "How?" Arisov screamed over the roar. "The charges," I said, patting the C4 explosives in my pack. "We blow the supports. We bury this hole forever." We ran out of the booth, back towards the elevator. But the elevator cage was gone. The cable had snapped. It lay in a crumpled heap on the floor. We were trapped at the bottom of the world, and the landlord was coming up the stairs to meet us. We stared at the crumpled wreckage of the elevator cage. It was a twisted mass of steel, smoking in the heat. Our only ride to the surface was gone. Volkov looked up into the shaft. The darkness seemed to go on forever. "There is a service ladder," he said, pointing his flashlight beam. "It runs parallel to the main shaft. Maintenance access." 12 kilometers, Arisov whispered. He sounded defeated. 12 kilometers straight up. In this heat. It is impossible. We will boil alive before we reach level 6. "We don't have a choice, Doctor," I said, checking the seals on my suit. "We climb, or we stay here and become part of the choir." We moved to the maintenance gantry. The ladder was old. Rusted iron rungs bolted directly into the stone wall. It was narrow, slippery with condensation, and that strange, black oil. I took the lead. Volkov took the rear to carry the heavy explosives. Arisov and the remaining Spetsnaz operative, a man named Dmitri, were in the middle. We started to climb. Clang, step, clang, step. The first 1,000 meters were pure adrenaline. The fear of what was below us pushed us upward. The sound of the drill was still roaring beneath our feet, a constant reminder that something was coming. But then, the fatigue set in. The heat was oppressive. My suit felt like a sauna. Sweat stung my eyes. Every breath burned my throat. The air filters were working overtime, whining against the thick, sulfurous atmosphere. 2,000 meters. My muscles screamed. My hands cramped around the iron rungs. I tried to count the steps to keep my mind focused. 100, 200, 500. But the numbers lost their meaning. Time began to blur. In the deep earth, there is no day or night. There is only the climb. Around 3,000 meters up, the hallucinations started. I looked at the stone wall, inches from my face. The rock wasn't static. It was moving, flowing like a slow river. I saw faces in the stone. My mother, my father, soldiers I had lost in Afghanistan. They were trapped in the rock, their mouths open, screaming silently. "Major!" Arisov's voice crackled in my ear. He sounded delirious. "The distance. It is wrong." "What are you talking about?" I gasped. "We have been climbing for hours," Arisov said. "We should be at level 8 by now. But the altimeter, it hasn't moved. We are running in place." "Don't look at the instruments," I ordered. "Just climb." But he was right. The shaft felt like it was stretching, like the earth itself was expanding to keep us trapped. The darkness above never got closer. The darkness below never got farther away. Suddenly, Dmitri stopped. "I can't," he sobbed. "I can't feel my hands." "Keep moving, Dmitri," Volkov barked from below. "Don't stop." "It's the heat," Dmitri cried. "It's inside my suit. My skin, it's melting." I looked down. Dmitri was clinging to the ladder, but his gloves, they weren't holding the rung. They were fusing to it. The rubber of his gloves was melting into the rust of the iron, and his hands were melting into the gloves. He tried to lift his right hand. A sickening, tearing sound echoed in the shaft. He screamed. He was stuck. He was becoming part of the ladder. "Help me!" he shrieked. "Cut me loose!" Volkov climbed up to him. He pulled out his combat knife. "Hold still," Volkov said. But it wasn't just his hands. Dmitri's boots had fused to the rung below. His chest was pressing against the ladder, and I could see the fabric of his suit bonding with the metal. "The infection," Arisov whispered. "It accelerates with adrenaline. The more he panics, the faster it spreads. Dmitri looked at me. His eyes were wide. Blood was leaking from his tear ducts. Major, please, don't leave me. I looked at Volkov. Volkov shook his head. There was no way to cut him loose without taking his hands and feet off, and in this environment, the shock would kill him instantly. We have to go, I said. My voice felt like broken glass. No! Dmitri screamed. No! Volkov grabbed Dmitri's shoulder. He leaned in close. You are holding the line, soldier, Volkov said softly. You are the rear guard now. Do not let them pass. Volkov pulled the pin on a grenade and wedged it between Dmitri's chest and the ladder. I am sorry, brother, Volkov whispered. We scrambled up the ladder, faster, desperate. Below us, Dmitri screamed one last time. Boom! The explosion shook the ladder. Shrapnel pinged off the metal walls. The screaming stopped. We didn't look back. We just climbed, climbing on the echo of our dead friend. 4,000 meters. We reached a platform, a service hatch, level 9. We collapsed on the metal grating, gasping for air. We were alive, but we were fewer, and the darkness above was still hungry. Level 9 was the maintenance sector. Ventilation, water filtration, power relays. It was a maze of pipes and catwalks. We needed to rest. We needed to find water. And we needed to find a way to bypass the next section of the shaft, which Arisov said might be blocked by the explosion debris. We cracked the seal on the airlock door and entered the level. It was dark here, but not pitch black. The emergency lights were flickering with a strobe-like effect. Flash, dark, flash, dark. It made movement look jerky, unnatural. The air here was cold, finally, but it was a damp cold. The floor was covered in a thin layer of water. Stay sharp, I whispered. Check your corners. We moved through the maze of pipes. The silence here was different. It wasn't empty. It was waiting. Look at the walls, Volkov said, raising his rifle. I shone my light on the concrete wall. There were shadows burned into the paint, like the nuclear shadows in Hiroshima. Silhouettes of men running, men falling, men fighting, but there were no bodies, just the shadows. It is an energy discharge, Arisov muttered, examining a shadow that looked like a man being torn in half. Something high energy vaporized them instantly. Or, I said, looking closely at the shadow, they didn't vaporize. They went into the wall. The shadow wasn't flat. It had depth. It looked like the man was trapped inside the concrete, pressing against the surface from the other side. A 2D prison for a 3D soul. Suddenly, a metallic clang echoed from down the corridor. We froze. Clang. Scrape. Clang. It was coming from the water filtration room. We moved forward, boots splashing softly in the water. I took point. Volkov covered the rear. Arisov was in the middle, clutching the data tapes like a holy relic. We reached the door to the filtration room. It was glass. Through the grime, I saw movement. Inside, there were figures, 3 of them. They were wearing technician jumpsuits. They were standing around a large water tank, their backs to us. Survivors? Arisov whispered, hope in his voice. I don't think so, I said. Look at their posture. They were standing too still, rigid, like mannequins. And their arms were too long. They hung down past their knees. I pushed the door open. Identify yourselves! I shouted. The 3 figures turned around slowly. They didn't have faces. Where their faces should have been, there was only smooth gray bone. No eyes, no mouth, no nose, just a blank slate. But they could see us. The one in the middle let out a sound. It wasn't a scream. It was a burst of static noise, like a radio tuning between stations. Krasty! Contact! Volkov yelled. The creatures lunged. They moved unnaturally fast, their limbs snapping and jerking like broken marionettes. I opened fire. Bang, bang, bang. The bullets hit the center creature. Black ichor sprayed from its chest. It stumbled back but didn't fall. It didn't seem to feel pain. Volkov unleashed a burst of automatic fire. The heavy 7.62 rounds tore the arm off the second creature. The limb fell into the water, twitching on its own. The creature didn't even slow down. It leaped at Volkov, tackling him into the pipes. Get off him! I screamed. I ran forward and kicked the creature in the head. It felt like kicking a rock. I aimed my rifle point blank at its blank face and pulled the trigger. The head exploded in a shower of bone and black slime. The body went limp. Volkov threw the headless corpse off him and stood up, breathing hard. He was covered in the black slime. "Are you bit?" I asked. "No," he grunted, wiping the slime from his visor. "Just bruised. They are strong, too strong for humans." Arisov was backing away, staring at the third creature. It hadn't attacked. It was standing by the water tank, vibrating. "Don't shoot it," Arisov said. "Look, it is vibrating. It is a beacon." The creature's chest was glowing with a faint violet light. The static noise was getting louder. It was calling for help. "Kill it!" I ordered. Volkov raised his rifle. But before he could fire, the shadows on the wall moved. The burned silhouettes. They peeled themselves off the concrete. They stepped out of the wall, becoming three-dimensional forms of darkness. Shadow people, pure void, in the shape of men. They outnumbered us 10-1. "Run!" I yelled. "To the stairwell!" We sprinted back the way we came. The shadows chased us. They didn't run. They glided. They passed through pipes and machinery, as if they weren't there. One of them reached out and brushed against my shoulder. It felt like liquid nitrogen. The cold burned through my suit. I stumbled but kept running. We reached the emergency stairwell door. Volkov slammed it shut and spun the locking wheel. Bam! 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 They were pounding on the door from the other side. The metal began to dent. "Block it!" Volkov shouted. We dragged a heavy metal shelf in front of the door, then a crate of spare parts. We stood there, panting, listening to the inhuman screeching on the other side. "They know we are here," Arisov said, sliding down the wall to the floor. "The whole station knows. We are bacteria in a sick body, and the white blood cells are coming." "We aren't bacteria," I said, reloading my weapon. "We are the virus, and we are going to kill the host. We have to keep going up," Volkov said. "Level 9 is compromised." I looked at the stairs leading up, dark, silent, but above us, somewhere around level 5, lay the biolabs. If level 9 was bad, I didn't want to think about what was waiting for us in the labs. "Let's move," I said, before the shadows figure out how to walk through doors. We climbed for what felt like days. My hands were raw, bleeding inside my gloves. The air in the stairwell was getting thinner, but the smell was getting worse. We reached the blast door for level 5. The sign on the door read, Sector 5, Biological Analysis and Containment. The door was warm to the touch. It was pulsing, like a feverish forehead. "We have to go through," Volkov rasped. "The service ladders on this level are collapsed. We need to cross the main lab to reach the upper elevators." I didn't like it. The window on the door was covered in a thick red condensation. We couldn't see inside. Volkov spun the wheel. It was stuck. He grunted, putting his massive shoulder against the metal. With a screech of rusted hinges and tearing rubber, the door popped open. A rush of hot, wet air hit us. It smelled like a slaughterhouse mixed with a greenhouse, the smell of copper, fertilizer, and rotting meat. We stepped inside. "God in heaven," Arisov whispered. It wasn't a lab anymore. It was a jungle, but the plants weren't green. They were red, purple, and black. And they weren't made of cellulose. They were made of flesh. Vines that looked like giant intestines draped from the ceiling, dripping a clear, viscous fluid. The floor was covered in a carpet of moss that looked like scabbed skin, and growing out of the metal desks were bulbous, pulsating sacs that looked like tumors. "Don't touch anything," I ordered, my voice trembling. We moved slowly through the overgrowth. The floor felt spongy beneath our boots. Squelch, squelch. "Look at the specimens." Arisov pointed to a row of smashed glass tanks. The tanks were labeled Depth 8000 m, Flora. The things inside had shattered the glass and grown out. They were fern-like structures, but instead of leaves, they had tiny, human fingers. They were swaying in the stagnant air, grasping at nothing. "This isn't evolution," Arisov said, wiping sweat from his face. "This is cancer. The Earth has a cancer, and we are walking in the tumor." We reached the center of the lab, a massive atrium where the main experiments were held. In the middle of the room, growing out of a reinforced containment pit, was a tree. But it was a tree of bone. The trunk was made of fused rib cages and spines, twisting upwards in a white spiral. The branches were long, skeletal arms ending in clawed hands. And hanging from the branches like fruit were heads, human heads. Some were skulls, some still had flesh. Their eyes were closed. They looked like they were sleeping. "Are those the missing scientists?" Volkov asked, his rifle shaking in his hands. "Part of them," I said. "The biomass uses everything. Nothing is wasted." Suddenly, one of the heads on the tree opened its eyes. It looked directly at me. Its eyes were milky white. Then, it opened its mouth. "Help!" it wheezed. It wasn't a scream. It was a gurgle of air passing through a dry throat. "Help! Us!" Then another head woke up, and another. Soon, the whole tree was murmuring, a chorus of the damned. "Kill us! Burn us! Help us!" "Ignore them!" I shouted. "It's a trap! Keep moving!" As we ran past the bone tree, the floor erupted. Tentacles made of muscle and wire lashed out from the moss. One of them wrapped around Volkov's ankle. He roared and fell face first into the fleshy carpet. The tentacle began to drag him towards the pit, towards the tree. "Volkov!" I grabbed his arm. Arisov grabbed his vest. We pulled. The tentacle was strong. It was pulling with the strength of hydraulic machinery. "Shoot it!" Volkov screamed. "Shoot the root!" I pulled my sidearm and fired 3 shots into the thick, meaty vine. Bang, bang, bang! It sprayed black blood and thrashed wildly, releasing Volkov. "Get up! Move!" The whole room was waking up now. The intestine vines were descending from the ceiling like snakes. The tumor sacs on the desks were bursting open, releasing swarms of insect-like creatures made of teeth and bone. We sprinted for the exit. I could hear the gnashing of teeth behind me, the sound of wet flesh slapping against metal. We reached the airlock on the far side. Volkov threw himself against the door, jamming the lock shut just as a massive, fleshy limb slammed against the glass. We fell to the floor of the corridor, gasping for air. Safe, for now. But as I looked at Arisov, I realized the horror wasn't over. He was clutching his chest. He was coughing. And with every cough, he was spitting up something black. We were in the decontamination chamber between level 5 and level 4. The air here was sterile, white, and cold. It felt like a hospital waiting room. Arisov was sitting on the bench, leaning against the lockers. He looked terrible. His skin was gray. His eyes were sunken, and black veins were spiderwebbing up his neck. "Doctor?" I asked, kneeling beside him. "Show me." Arisov shook his head weakly. "It doesn't matter, Major. Show me." He slowly unzipped his hazmat suit. He pulled up his shirt. Volkov turned away. On Arisov's side, just above his hip, was a wound. It wasn't a bite. It looked like a patch of gray fungus. It was growing, pulsating, and in the center of the wound, something was moving under his skin. "When?" I asked. "Level 9, Arisov whispered. When the shadow touched me, the cold. It wasn't just cold, it was spores. Why didn't you say anything?" "Because you would have left me," he smiled sadly. "And I needed to see the data. I needed to know." "Know what?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out the tape reel, the recording from the deep. "It's not a monster, Yuri," he said, using my first name for the first time. "It's a nervous system, the planet. It thinks, it dreams, and we woke it up." He coughed again, a violent, wet cough. He spit a clump of black matter onto the white floor. The clump moved. It tried to crawl away. I stomped on it with my boot. "I can hear them," Arisov said, tapping his head. "The hive. They are calling me back. They say, 'It is warm down there. No pain. Only unity.'" He looked at his hand. His fingernails were falling off. The tips of his fingers were turning into stone. "You have to go," he said. "Level 4 is the armory. You can get to the surface from there." "We are taking you with us," Volkov said, his voice thick with emotion. "We leave no one behind." "No," Arisov said firmly. I am already gone, Sergeant. If I go to the surface, I become a carrier. I will bring the spore to the world. Is that what you want? A global pandemic of stone and flesh? He stood up, struggling. He walked over to the decontamination console. I am locking the door from this side, he said. I will override the safety protocols. I will flood this chamber with incendiary gas. Arisov, don't. I stepped forward. Stay back, he shouted. He pulled a grenade from Volkov's belt, which was lying on the bench. He held the grenade tight. His hand was almost completely calcified now. Take the tape, Major, he said, tossing me the reel. Tell the world. Tell them to never dig again. Tell them to leave the sleeping dogs lie. He punched the code into the console. The alarm started to blare. Warning, incineration sequence initiated. Go! He screamed. I looked at him one last time. He wasn't the scared scientist anymore. He was a soldier fighting his last battle. Goodbye, Doctor, I said. Volkov and I ran into the airlock leading to level 4. The heavy door hissed shut behind us. Through the thick glass, I watched Arisov. He sat back down on the bench. He looked at the grenade in his hand, he looked at the door, he smiled at us. And then, the vents opened. Fire filled the room. We turned away as the blast shook the walls. Arisov was gone. The infection was burned away. Now it was just me and Volkov, 2 men against an army of the dead, and we were running out of ammo. We stepped into level 4, the armory. I hoped to find weapons. Instead, we found the soldiers, hundreds of them. The original security force of the station. They weren't dead. They were standing in formation, statues of gray stone, holding rusted rifles, waiting for a command. And as we entered the room, hundreds of stone heads turned to look at us, and the command came. Purge, the voice in my head said. The statues raised their rifles. The armory was a tomb, but the dead were not sleeping. The army of stone soldiers stood before us, hundreds of them. Their uniforms were tattered rags, gray with dust. Their skin was cracked slate, but their eyes, or where their eyes used to be, glowed with a faint, violet light. The hive mind was piloting them. Intruders! The collective voice resonated in the room. It didn't come from their throats. It came from the vibration of their stone bodies rubbing together. Volkov stepped in front of me. He was a mountain of a man, but against this tide, he looked small. Major, Volkov said, checking the magazine of his PKM machine gun. Go to the surface. Rig the explosives. Blow the shaft. We fight together, Sergeant, I said, raising my AK-47. No, Volkov shook his head. Look at the numbers. You cannot fight this. I will buy you time. I will be the wall. Before I could argue, the stone army charged. They didn't run like men. They moved like a landslide. Heavy, unstoppable. The sound of hundreds of stone boots hitting the metal floor was deafening. Thud, thud, thud. Volkov opened fire. Rat-tat-tat-tat-tat! The heavy machine gun roared. The rounds hit the front line of the statues. Stone shattered. Limbs flew off. Heads exploded into dust. But they didn't stop. They climbed over the fallen bodies of their comrades, relentless, emotionless. I fired my rifle, aiming for their legs. If I could break their structure, I could slow them down. Crack, crack, crack. One of the statues lunged at me. I dodged, but its stone fist grazed my shoulder. It felt like being hit by a sledgehammer. My arm went numb. I fell back against a weapons crate. The creature raised its fist to crush my skull. Suddenly, Volkov was there. He tackled the stone soldier, slamming it against the wall. He smashed its head with the butt of his machine gun until it stopped moving. Go! Volkov screamed. He turned back to the horde. I said go! He kicked a table over for cover and mounted his machine gun. He wasn't firing to kill anymore. He was firing to make noise, to draw them all to him. Come on! Volkov roared at the monsters. Come and get some! I looked at him one last time. He was smiling, the smile of a warrior who finally found a worthy death. I ran. I sprinted towards the emergency exit at the back of the armory. Behind me, the sound of gunfire was constant, but slowly, it began to fade. I heard Volkov scream, not in pain, in defiance. Then, a massive explosion. He had detonated his grenade belt. The shockwave knocked me off my feet. Dust filled the corridor. When the dust settled, the gunfire had stopped. Volkov was gone. I was alone. I stumbled up the stairs to level 1, the surface level. My legs were burning. My lungs were raw. I was bleeding from my ears. I reached the main hangar. The silence here was terrifying after the noise of the battle below. The facility was waking up. The walls were vibrating. The violet fungus I had seen in the deep was now growing here, in the hangar. It was spreading fast, covering the equipment, the trucks, the doors. I ran to the main support beams of the drilling tower. I had to finish the mission. I took the C4 charges from my pack. My hands were shaking so hard I dropped the detonator twice. "Focus, Yuri," I whispered to myself. "Do it for Volkov. Do it for Arisov." I planted the charges on the 4 main pillars of the tower. I set the timer. 3 minutes. 3 minutes to run. 3 minutes to escape the radius of the collapse. I hit the arming switch. The red light on the detonator beeped. Beep, beep, beep. I turned to the main exit doors. The wind was howling outside. Freedom. But then the floor of the hangar cracked open, right in front of the exit. A fissure appeared in the concrete. Steam hissed out. And from the crack, a hand emerged. A giant, grey hand. The hive hadn't just sent soldiers. It had sent a guardian. A massive, amorphous shape pulled itself out of the concrete. It looked like a man, but it was 10 feet tall, made of fused bodies and rebar and stone. It had no face, just a vertical slit where a mouth should be. It stood between me and the door. It let out a sound like grinding metal. "Stay," it rumbled. "Become." I had no bullets left. I had no grenades. I only had the detonator remote in my hand. I looked at the timer. 2 minutes. I looked at the monster. "I'm not staying," I said. I didn't run away from it. I ran towards it. The creature seemed confused. It raised a massive arm to smash me. I slid on the icy floor, going right between its legs. I was faster than it. I was smaller. I scrambled up onto a stack of crates near the window. The monster turned, roaring. I didn't hesitate. I threw my heavy backpack at the window. The glass shattered. I jumped. I fell 10 feet into the snow. The cold hit me like a knife. I scrambled up and ran. I ran into the white, blinding storm. I didn't know where I was going. I just ran away from the tower. Behind me, the timer hit 0. Boom! The explosion wasn't just a sound. It was a physical blow. The ground jumped beneath my feet. I turned around, shielding my eyes from the snow. The massive drilling tower of Site SG-3, the needle, groaned. The charges had blown the support legs. The metal screeched, twisting under its own weight. Slowly, majestically, the tower began to fall. It collapsed inward, crashing down directly onto the main hangar. The concrete foundation shattered, and then the ground gave way. The borehole, the wound we had made in the earth, swallowed the facility. The lab, the armory, the dorms, everything collapsed into the pit. The tower fell into the hole, plunging down like a spear thrown by a god. A cloud of dust and snow rose up hundreds of meters high. I lay in the snow, watching the destruction. It was over. We had buried it. We had closed the door. Or so I thought. I saw lights in the sky, the extraction helicopter. It was late, but it was here. The pilot spotted my flare. He descended, the rotor wash blowing the toxic dust away. I limped towards the chopper. A soldier pulled me inside. "Where is the rest of the team?" the pilot shouted over the comms. "Gone," I said, collapsing onto the metal seat. "All gone. Did you secure the objective?" I patted my chest pocket. The tape reel was there. The proof. "Yes," I said. "Take us home." The helicopter lifted off. We rose above the storm. I looked down at the site one last time through the window. The facility was a crater, just a black scar in the white snow. But as we gained altitude, I saw it. The crater. It wasn't empty. In the center of the destruction, where the borehole used to be, there was a glow. A violet light, pulsing. And the snow around the crater, it wasn't white anymore. It was turning gray. The infection. It hadn't stopped. It was spreading. The spores were in the air. I put on my headset. I could hear the pilot talking to base. "Base, this is Eagle 1. Package secured. Returning to base." But there was interference on the radio. Static. hiss, crackle, and then I heard it again. The voice. It wasn't coming from the ground. It was coming from the radio. It was coming from the sky. "We are awake," the voice whispered. "We are everywhere." I looked at the pilot. He didn't seem to hear it. He was just flying. But then I saw his hand on the cyclic stick. His glove. The fingertips were turning gray. I looked at my own hands. Under my fingernails, black veins were starting to form. Arisov was right. You cannot kill a planet. You cannot close a door that opens from the inside. We didn't escape. We just brought the seed to the surface. I closed my eyes. The vibration of the helicopter felt like the drill. Thump, thump, thump. I am Major Yuri Vaganov, and I am bringing hell home with me. The official Soviet records state that the Kola Superdeep Borehole was abandoned due to higher than expected temperatures and lack of funding. Major Vaganov and his team were officially listed as missing in action during a training exercise in the Urals. The tape you just heard, the recording of the screams, was never released to the public. It was buried in a KGB archive for 30 years, until now. But here is the question that keeps me up at night. If Vaganov survived, if he brought the tape back, what else did he bring back? Look at the world around you. Look at the sinkholes opening up in Siberia. Look at the strange humming sounds reported in cities all over the world. Look at how the stone statues in museums seem to be watching you. Maybe the infection didn't spread instantly. Maybe it's slow. Maybe it takes decades. Maybe we are all slowly turning to stone, and we just haven't realized it yet. Check your skin. Is it a little drier than usual? Are your joints a little stiffer? Do you hear a ringing in your ears when it's quiet? That's not tinnitus, that's the drill. And it's still running. This is Captain Nightwhisper. If you enjoyed this descent into madness, break the silence and hit the like button. To join the crew and uncover more classified files, hit subscribe. Until the next nightmare, keep digging. Or maybe, don't.